On the night of February 24th, 1978, at approximately 10:45 in the evening, 5 men drove away from a college basketball game in Chico, California. For days later, their car was found abandoned on a snow-covered mountain road 70 miles in the wrong direction from home. For months after that, one of them was discovered dead inside a remote Forest Service trailer, wrapped in 8 blankets, surrounded by enough food to feed all 5 men for a year. He had starved to death. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The group called themselves the Gators. They played basketball every week at a community center in Yuba County, part of a program for adults with developmental disabilities. Raymond Carter was 32, the oldest and the most trusting. His family described him as someone who would help anyone. Martin Hayes was 30, quiet, and the only one who owned a car. Dennis Cole was 29. Vincent Ruiz was 24 and could not read or write, but Raymond always helped him with those things. And then there was Michael Brooks, 25, a military veteran who took medication for schizophrenia. These 5 men were inseparable. Their families referred to them as the boys. They lived with their parents, held steady jobs, and followed routines that gave their lives structure. On that Friday in February, they had one thing on their minds. The next day, Saturday, they were scheduled to play in a Special Olympics tournament. The winning team would receive an all-expenses-paid trip to Los Angeles. They had laid out their uniforms the night before. They had talked about nothing else for weeks. But first, they wanted to watch a game. California State University at Chico was hosting a basketball matchup that Friday evening, and the boys decided to drive up together in Martin's turquoise and white Mercury Montego. Chico was about 50 miles north. It was a straight shot. They had done it before. The game ended around 10 o'clock. Surveillance footage from a convenience store 3 blocks from the arena captured the group just after 10 that night. They bought snacks, a cherry pie, a lemon pie, 2 candy bars, a couple of sodas, and some milk. The clerk was annoyed because they were keeping him from closing, but the transaction was ordinary. Nothing seemed wrong. They paid. They left. That was the last confirmed sighting of all 5 men together. At some point on the drive home, something changed. Instead of heading south toward Yuba City, the car turned east. It climbed into the mountains. It traveled deep into the Plumas National Forest, along roads the men had no reason to know and no reason to take. This was not a detour. This was not a shortcut. This was the opposite direction. When the boys did not return home by Saturday morning, their families knew immediately that something was wrong. These were men who lived by routine. They had a basketball game to play. Their uniforms were waiting. Their teammates were waiting. None of them would have missed it voluntarily. The families began calling each other. No one had heard anything. By Saturday afternoon, they contacted the police. Search teams were dispatched. Highways between Chico and Yuba City were canvassed. Hospitals were checked. Nothing. On Monday, February 27th, a forest ranger working in Plumas National Forest called the Yuba County Sheriff's Office. He had seen a Mercury Montego parked along a remote fire road 2 days earlier. At the time, he thought nothing of it. People often drove into the mountains on winter weekends to ski. But after seeing the missing persons bulletin, he recognized the car. Investigators arrived the next day. The vehicle was found on a narrow, snow-covered road at an elevation where temperatures routinely dropped below freezing at night. It was stuck in a snowbank, though not deeply. Officers examined the car and determined that 5 men could have easily pushed it free. There were no signs of mechanical failure. The gas tank still had fuel. Inside the car, investigators found the snacks purchased from a convenience store in Chico. The wrappers had been opened. There were also basketball programs from the game and a neatly folded road map. But there were no jackets, no extra clothing, no camping gear, and no indication of why the car had been abandoned. Footprints in the snow showed that all 5 men had exited the vehicle and walked away together. The tracks led uphill, deeper into the forest, in the direction opposite from where they had come. After several hundred feet, the prints disappeared beneath fresh snow. Investigators could not follow them further. The discovery raised immediate questions. Why had the men driven into the mountains instead of going home? Why had they abandoned a working vehicle? And why had they walked further into the wilderness in freezing temperatures without any supplies or warm clothing? Search efforts continued for weeks, but heavy snowfall made large sections of the forest inaccessible. Helicopters scanned the area from above. Ground teams combed trails and logging roads. Psychics were consulted. Tips came in from people claiming to have seen the men, but none of the leads went anywhere. As winter dragged on, the search was suspended. Investigators would have to wait until the snow melted. One witness did come forward with a strange account. Joseph Shans, a man in his 50s, had been driving alone to the same area on the night the boys disappeared. He had been on his way back from a trip and had pulled over on a side road after experiencing chest pains. While resting in his car, trying to decide whether to continue driving or wait for help, he claimed to have seen a group of men near another vehicle. He said there were about 5 of them, though he could not be certain. Some were outside the car. Others appeared to be standing nearby. Sean said he briefly considered asking them for help but decided against it. He was worried about his heart, and he did not want to alarm them or create a situation he could not manage. After resting for a while, he drove himself back to town and sought medical attention. When investigators interviewed him weeks later, Shans could not provide many details. He had been in pain and disoriented. He was not sure the exact time, though he believed it was late, possibly close to midnight. He described the car he saw as matching the description of Martin Hayes' Mercury, parked in roughly the same location where it was later found. But there was one detail in his account that did not fit. Shans claimed he saw what looked like a woman and a baby with the group. This did not match the 5 men who were missing. Investigators were uncertain whether to trust his account. Was he describing the boys? Or had he seen someone else entirely? Or was it possible that pain and fear had distorted his memory? His story added another layer of uncertainty to a case that was already impossible to make sense of. By spring, the snow in the high elevations of Plumas National Forest had begun to melt. On June 4th, 1978, a group of motorcyclists riding trails near a place called Rogers Cow Camp came across an old Forest Service trailer, sitting in a clearing about 20 miles from where the car had been found. The trailer was used by rangers during the summer months and was supposed to be locked, but the window had been broken and the door was ajar. Curious, the motorcyclists looked inside. What they found was the body of Raymond Carter. He was lying on a bed, his body wrapped in 8 white bed sheets that had been pulled tightly around him, covering everything except his lower legs. His feet were exposed, blackened, and swollen from severe frostbite. His beard had grown long. An autopsy would later determine that Raymond had lost between 80 and 100 pounds. He had been alive for anywhere from 8 to 13 weeks after the night he disappeared. He had died of starvation and hypothermia. The trailer was stocked with supplies. In a storage locker just outside, there were military-style sea rations, enough canned food to feed 5 men for more than a year. Inside the trailer, there were matches. There were propane canisters. There was a small heating unit that only needed to be turned on. There were heavy blankets and winter clothing. Raymond Carter had broken into the trailer. He had found shelter. He had access to everything he needed to survive, but he had not used any of it. Most of the food remained untouched. The propane was still full. No fire had been lit. It was as though he had simply laid down and waited. The only items that had been opened were a few cans of food, as if someone fed him briefly and then stopped. On the bed next to Raymond's body, investigators found his wallet, still containing cash, and a wristwatch that his family did not recognize. His shoes were missing. In their place inside the trailer were a pair of sneakers that belonged to Michael Brooks, the 5th member of the group, the man who had never been found. The day after the trailer was discovered, search teams found the remains of Martin Hayes and Dennis Cole about 11 miles from where the car had been abandoned. Their bodies were in the woods, severely decomposed and partially scattered by animals. Autopsies concluded that both men had died of hypothermia, likely within the first few days after leaving the vehicle. There was no evidence they had ever made it to the trailer. 2 days later, Vincent Ruiz's remains were found less than 2 miles from the trailer. His father had insisted on joining the search despite being advised against it. When he found his son's jacket lying in the underbrush, he picked it up. His son's spine fell out of the sleeve. The rest of Vincent's body was discovered nearby, along with his shoes. Investigators believed he had made it to the trailer, stayed for a time, and then left, possibly trying to find help. He had not made it far. Michael Brooks was never found. The only trace of him was the pair of sneakers left inside the trailer. It was unclear when he had been there, or why he had left, or what had happened to him after. No remains, no clothing, no sightings. He simply vanished. The immediate assumption was that the men had taken a wrong turn. Perhaps they had intended to visit someone Michael knew in a nearby town and had gotten lost in the dark. Perhaps they had followed the wrong road and ended up in the mountains by mistake. But that theory did not explain why the car was found so far off any reasonable route, on a road that required specific knowledge to navigate without damaging the vehicle. The underside of the Mercury was undamaged, which suggested that whoever was driving had known the terrain well enough to avoid the deep ruts and rocks that covered that section of road. It also did not explain why the men had abandoned the car when it could have been pushed free, or why they had walked further into forest instead of back toward the main road where they had come from. A second theory focused on the possibility of foul play. Perhaps the men had encountered someone at the basketball game or on the drive home. Perhaps they had been followed, threatened, or forced off the road. But there was no evidence of a struggle, no signs of violence on the bodies that were recovered, no reports of suspicious individuals. The men had been seen purchasing snacks after the game, and they appeared calm and ordinary in the surveillance footage. If someone had threatened them, it had happened after that. A third possibility was that something had frightened them. Perhaps they believed they were being followed. Perhaps they saw something that caused them to panic and flee. People with developmental disabilities can sometimes misinterpret situations or respond perceived threats in ways that seem irrational to others. But even this theory struggled to account for the decisions that followed. Why drive so far into the mountains? Why leave the car? And why, once inside the trailer with warmth and food, did Raymond Carter not survive? The most troubling evidence was the condition of the trailer and the state in which Raymond's body was found. He had clearly been alive for months after the others had died. Someone had wrapped him in blankets, carefully, as though trying to keep him comfortable. But who? If Michael Brooks had been there, why had he left his shoes behind? If he had gone for help, why had no one ever seen him? And if he had died somewhere in the wilderness, why had his body never been discovered despite extensive searches? Raymond Carter's behavior inside the trailer also defied explanation. He had access to food, but had eaten very little. He had access to heat, but had not turned it on. His feet were so badly frostbitten that walking would have been agonizing, possibly impossible. It seemed as though he had been waiting for someone to tell him what to do, waiting for permission, waiting for help that never came. The families were devastated. They wanted answers, but investigators had none to give. The Yuba County Sheriff's Office called the case bizarre as hell. No single theory fit all the facts. Every explanation left gaps. The investigation eventually went cold, not because it was closed, but because there was nothing left to pursue. 46 years have passed. The case remains unsolved. Michael Brooks has never been found. The families of the other 4 men have never received a full explanation of what happened that night or in the months that followed. Theories continue to circulate. Some believe the men were chased into the mountains by someone they feared. Others think they followed snowcat tracks left by a Forest Service vehicle, mistakenly believing the tracks would lead them to safety. Some think Michael Brooks, the most capable of the group, led them into the wilderness for reasons only he understood and then disappeared, either by choice or by circumstance. What is certain is this: 5 men left the basketball game and never made it home. 4 of them died in the wilderness under circumstances that defy rational explanation. 1 of them survived in a trailer for months, surrounded by the resources he needed to live but did not use them, and 1 of them vanished without a trace. The Plumas National Forest hold their story, but has never given it back. Cases like this do not disappear. They just fade when people stop asking questions. If you have thoughts on what might have happened, or if this case reminds you of something you have heard before, leave a comment below.